And so I'm excited to introduce our next speaker. It's Jack Evans, Managing Director of Client Operations at Ipsos, Karian and Box. Jack has worked in the employee experience space for 12 years, working with the likes of Lloyds Banking Group, Coca-Cola, and industry-leading thinker Professor Sir Gary Cooper. Today, Jack will discuss, is your employee wellbeing program really effective? Jack will share key findings from interviews with over 2,500 UK employees, exploring what's truly driving burnout and how leaders can better support well-being. Let's welcome Jack to the stage now. Hello.
Hello. Thank you.
No problem at all. I'm just going to bring a presentation and let you get started.
Perfect. Sounds good. All right. Thank you, Marta. And yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. It's a pleasure to be here. As Marta said, my name's Jack, and I work at Ipsos, Karian and Box. And I'm here today to talk about well-being, in the sense that how can we really get well-being and do well-being in a way that works? So what matters, what doesn't, kind of what's the state of the nation, drawing on some of the research that we've done recently, and really how to have impact. And we'll kind of uncover that as we go through today. So before I get into that, a little bit of an introduction to who we are in terms of Ipsos, Karian and Box. So in a nutshell there, that's us, that's who we are, that's what we do. And we essentially work with businesses to help them understand how their people think, how they feel, how they act at work, and help them on the other side to then create positive change on the back of that, and listening to their people, listening to their workforce to understand what's on their mind, and putting things in place that really tries to improve things. We do that as part of a team of around 200 across the globe, sitting within Ipsos, who are one of the largest market research and kind of all-round research companies in the world. So in the UK, most famous for their political polling, which has obviously been quite well documented this year in the UK, given the political situation. And we do what we do in Ipsos, Karian and Box for big brands, complex organizations, some of which you can see there. And we survey around, over 3 million employees a year as part of us doing that. And today I want to talk about three key things, really. And as Marta mentioned in the introduction there, as I do that, I'll draw on some research we did towards the back end of the summer, late August, early September, where we spoke to over 2,500 people in the UK, so a representative sample of the UK workforce. And we were really interested in their views when it came to well-being, when it came to burnout. And the three things I'll touch on today are kind of the market. Where is the well-being market? What's happening with it? Are we making progress within it? Really delve into the data then in terms of what is that state of the nation? What is it telling us? And then finally finish off with you in your roles as HR practitioners, as people practitioners. You know, what does that really mean, and what should we be thinking about doing? So I said I would start with a little bit of the kind of the state of the market, and that's where we'll kind of begin. And I think there's probably one word to describe the wellbeing market, and that is thriving. You know, we've seen real steady growth over the last 10 to 15 years. I think that was expedited by COVID. I think that brought, if wellbeing wasn't already at the forefront of people's minds from a work point of view, then it certainly was through the pandemic. And that upward trajectory is continuing and is predicted to continue even further. And you can see they're projected to reach spending just shy of $100 billion a year by not too far away, 2026, in a couple of years' time. And I think where the market is it's mostly past that initial stage we were at of a few years ago of kind of what's the business case? Why should I be prioritizing well-being? I think we're well beyond that with some of the sums of money that we're talking about there. So then the question in my head goes to, okay, so what are we spending that money on? Is it making a difference? Are we progressing? And 1,000,001 ways you can look at this, and we've got a wealth of data available to us in Ipsos, but also, drawing on external sources as well. And I guess what I'm interested in is the macro level, the big picture data. So to start off with, we went to where most people used to go before ChatGPT existed, in Google. So what are people searching on Google? And we can see there that earlier this year, searches for burnout reached a 5-year peak earlier in 2024, which gives you a little bit of an insight, I guess, as to what's top of mind for the average employee. And then looking at some slightly more serious data sources. So this one here from the ONS in the UK, looking at the proportion of people kind of over a 10, 15-year period reporting some kind of signs, some evidence of depression or anxiety. And you can see that that's kind of steadily risen in general over that period. Yes, there's been some bigger ups and downs, but the general trajectory is upwards. And just this week, actually, there was an article in the UK on BBC News, which was looking at this kind of conundrum of work sickness, and specifically focused on some data from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which looked at the proportion of people and the cost to the UK government of people claiming health-related benefits. So people who are of working age, who basically aren't in work and are claiming some kind of benefit because of that. And you can see the numbers there are quite staggering. So over the last 4 years in the UK, they've seen a jump of over a third in terms of what the cost to the UK economy and the UK government is of people not being able to work due to ill health. And they predict a similar rise, to some fairly staggering numbers in the next 4 years, getting up to 63 billion that you can see there. I think what's interesting here is that when they compared the UK against other similar nations, so of a similar size and a similar kind of demographic makeup, the trend was actually the opposite way. So the general trend was going downwards, and the UK was in a negative way, kind of bucking that trend. And yes, there were a few countries, some of the Nordics, which is quite a surprise given they normally lead the way on this front, but some of the Nordics also experienced an increase over that period, but nowhere near, the same kind of figures that we're talking about. And I want to pull out two things within this that I'll come back to later, that two trends kind of within this data, one of which was the number of younger people claiming these health-related benefits had massively increased. I think it had doubled over the last 4 years. And related to that, the second point is the rise of mental health claims within this. So it's not just physical issues, it's preventing people from working and therefore claiming this support, and it's the rise of mental health as well. And, there's a number of other metrics that we could have talked about as to set the scene here. Sickness levels, I think, were at a 10-year high at the end of last year. There's a number of other metrics that help to set the scene, I suppose. So what did our data show? What did our research show? I've talked already about a number of different ways that we can perhaps measure and think about well-being at more of a macro level. And I guess zooming in now onto the individual level, and also looking at it from two different ends of the spectrum. So on the left there, you've got the positive, preventative end of the well-being spectrum, if you will, with 60% of people feeling like their employer takes positive action when it comes to their well-being. Yet on the other end of the spectrum, in the more reactive space, you've got over a third and almost 2 in 5 who feel at or close to burnout. And that's, that, I don't know, how does that feel from your perspective? But it does feel as though, if you think about the people listening here today, applying that kind of proportion to this group, you apply that back to your own team, your own organization, and you can kind of start to see how the numbers quite quickly stack up and become quite stark. And I guess what's driving that, these were the top 3 things that came out in the research in terms of things that were driving that. And this broadly stacks up with years of academic research into well-being and the key drivers of that and the things that trigger people. So it's fairly consistent in that sense. Number one is the sheer amount of work is too much. Too much is being expected of me in terms of my workload, in terms of perhaps the way I'm being asked to work. But secondly, that's backed up with a lack of support. So tangible support from my organization in terms of, have I got the resources? Have I got the tools, the systems, the processes, the equipment that I need to do my job and do my job well? But also some of the more intangible elements of support. So do I feel supported from my line manager? Do I feel supported from leaders in the organization? And I'll come back to that leadership topic later. And the third element was kind of a catch-all piece, really, in terms of, I just generally don't enjoy my job. And that's not to say that that's the way everyone feels, but that's one of the key drivers that we know is influencing how that significant proportion of people who do feel burnt out, and perhaps why they feel that way. And I mentioned leaders there, and that's one of the first key trends that I want to draw out here. And this really chimes with whenever we do this kind of research with our clients on a kind of one-to-one client basis, we see this pattern almost every single time. And the pattern is that burnout increases as with seniority. So the people in organisations who are most burnt out and with the poorest levels of well-being, more often than not, they're the ones at the top of the organisation. You can see that kind of perfect trend emerging there, which again is a real worry, given that it's our leaders who need to lead from the front with this role model. They need to set the tone, set the culture, and create that positive work environment when perhaps they're the ones who maybe need that support the most and more often than anyone else. And it's that classic saying of making sure you're putting your own oxygen mask on first before thinking about helping others. And that's exactly what we see here with leaders. I mentioned from the BBC article the rising kind of prominence of younger people struggling with their mental health and struggling with not being able to get into work for health-related reasons. That chimes true with the research that we've done here. So you can see that younger people, particularly that Gen Z generation, who are talked about what seems to be kind of all the time, much more likely to be struggling with burnout, as you can see there. And perhaps some of that is coming from the fact that they're, again, more likely to feel that they can't disconnect from work and they can't kind of get that work-life boundary and that work-life separation, if you will. And, you know, thinking about the age profile of these people, thinking about the timeline of the last 5-6 years with COVID, perhaps a lot of these people weren't actually in the world of work pre-COVID, and they perhaps entered during those early days and those early stages of the pandemic. And as things settle back to some kind of new normal over the last few years, are these people of that age profile kind of struggling to adapt and struggling to come to terms with what work really is and perhaps what it means. And we couldn't get too far into any kind of presentation without entering the work from home debate. And you can see here that in the research we've done, where and how people work and how they spend their time at work, again, matters from a burnout perspective. So you can see there that generally the more time people spend at their employer's location, whether that be an office, a call center, whatever it may be, the higher their levels of burnout are. And again, a particular trend that we see when we do this kind of research with individual clients as well. So something that we see fairly consistently. Now, again, this feels a little bit of a worry, given that from other research we've done, we know that more people are spending more of their time in the office than not in the office. So you can see here research we've done towards the back end of last year on where people were spending the majority of their time. You can see the two big populations in the 40% there, either spending all of their time at their employer's location, or a chunk of people there at 45%, working hybridly, and within that spending at least a couple of days a week at their employer's office. So I think it's around 2/3 spending at least 3 days a week in the office. So you go back to the point that the more time you spend in the office, the higher the levels of burnout are, coupled with the fact that more people are spending more time in the office than they're not. And also coupled with the fact that when we ask people, okay, if this is what you're currently doing, is that okay? Do you want to spend more time in the office? Do you want to spend less time in the office? Yes, you've got the majority of people there in the middle who are already working in a way that they're happy with and they prefer. So that the balance of time at home and in the office is good for them. But you've got that real significant chunk at the bottom there, that over 1/3 of people who actually want to spend less time in the office. Is that because they're feeling like they're struggling with their work-life balance? They're struggling with that sense of burnout, perhaps, potentially. And then the smallest group there, just over 1 in 10, want to spend more time in the office. And if you think about the policies that are being enacted across a lot of big corporate organizations at the minute to bring more people back into the office more often, that's perhaps why it's coming up against a sense of resistance from those people. So, a lot of well documented, I think, stories with big organizations changing their policy on working from home, working from the office, and almost struggling to win that battle and win that fight with their employees. Any sports fans will know Man United struggle with this when they got taken over and changed their policy. But also it's big corporates. Amazon, I think, have changed their policy from next year. I think Tesco and another number of other retailers are changing their policy going into 2025. A lot of tech companies, and perhaps this is some of that resistance that we're maybe seeing there. So I guess what bearing in mind all of that, what can you as people practitioners do with all of that? And back to where I started around the wellbeing market, what was, how much we're spending on it, how many more head of wellbeing type roles there are in businesses now, where should their time and effort be spent? And the first thing we did in this sense is ask people directly, okay, so what is it that you think your organization should be doing to help your well-being? And you can see there some of the things that people selected. And if you look at the things that are the most commonly selected ones there, it's not necessarily things that you would perhaps associate with good well-being. It's maybe things that you'd actually associate with general work experience, with general culture. Some of the things that we saw in that in the video show reel a few minutes ago around the different categories of the Inspiring Workplaces Awards. It's around a sense of inclusion, around a sense of listening. They're the real key things that people say, actually, that's where I want you to spend your time. That's where I want you to spend your efforts and your energies. And here we come to the real, I guess, crux of the issue, in that when we compare what people want with perhaps what we're spending our time, what we're spending our energy, and more importantly, what we're spending our money and our budgets trying to solve, there's a little bit of a mismatch. So yes, the things on the right hand side there, which make up the majority of spend, are important. Of course they are. But I think what we're hearing from employees when we speak to them is that they're almost just becoming expectations. They're hygiene factors. They're things that I almost don't need you to tell me that you're doing, because I just expect that to be happening, and I expect that to be happening as a prerequisite. And you can see, yes, they are important to people still, but they're towards the bottom end of that, of those set of factors that people say are really important. And again, this rings true when we don't just ask people directly, okay, what is it that you want? It's when we do a little bit more sophisticated looks at the data and to more in-depth analytics to look at what's really driving how people feel and that sense of well-being. And we can see here that of that group of people who say, yes, I think my organization actually does take positive action on my health and well-being, and they do really care, these are the three key things that they also say are happening. So rather than asking them directly, it's an indirect measure as to what's going on. And again, similar, it's not necessarily things that you would associate with positive well-being, in that it's not the programmatic employee assistance programs or your steps challenges and the free fruit bowls and all of those kind of classic well-being initiatives that organizations spend a lot of time on. It's actually things that are connected more to good work experience, good culture, low attrition. So things like good change management. We see every single organization going through multiple cycles of change at the same time, and kind of employees moving through that classic change curve, and quite often having those change curves almost stacked on top of each other, and they're moving through them all at slightly different paces at different times. And people who feel like their organization really takes positive action on their health and well-being say that change is managed well. So I'm informed about what's happening, I'm consulted, I have a voice, I have a say in perhaps not necessarily whether the change is happening, but perhaps how that change happens, or in what order, or when that change may happen. So there's definitely a sense of involvement and voice when it comes to change. The second thing that really matters, and I've touched on this earlier, is around understanding leadership. So do I feel like the leaders really listen to my voice, but also not just listen, do they really hear what I'm saying? Are they listening with a sense of lip service, or are they really listening with a sense that I'm going to take that feedback on board and really do something on the back of it? So are leaders showing that sense of empathy? Are they showing that sense of respect, which we see here as really important? And the third and final thing we see is, I guess, this idea of role modeling. So our leaders really walking the talk when it comes to well-being. And quite often we see clients have senior level role models and senior level sponsors, if you will, for their well-being program. And that's a really critical success factor, I think, for any well-being program to work, and for it to work well, in that you need authentic leaders right at the top of the business who say, we do care about your well-being. These are the ways in which we are factoring it into the way we're running our business, the way that we're managing change, the way that we're innovating and improving the business, and that that their actions speak louder than their words, and they really lead that from the front, and demonstrate to employees how they're sticking true to their word in terms of caring for people's well-being. So whistle stop tour, I think, in terms of what the data's saying, what the macro kind of economic picture is saying when it comes to well-being. And in terms of key takeaways, it's these, yes, we're doing more to improve well-being. We're spending more on well-being. There are more roles within people teams which are geared towards supporting and helping employee well-being. Those roles are becoming more senior. They're getting closer to HR directors, chief people officers. So yes, all of that is brilliant, but actually some of the macro level data doesn't necessarily show that we're making improvement. Now, of course, there's going to be pockets of improvement. There's organizations that have got well-documented stories of transforming their employees' well-being. And of course, there's people here today who've got real success stories from improving well-being. And the perspective I'm coming at this from is the kind of the macro level, almost government and society level view of are we really moving in the right direction? 2 in 5 for the UK workforce at or close to burnout. And in particular, leaders, as I mentioned, the younger employees, which we can validate that with other data sources we've got. And critically, most people who spend more time in the office also struggling as well, which is creating this dynamic of organizations trying to pull their employees back into the office, and perhaps employees almost pushing back on that, perhaps because of the burnout issue. And finally, it calls for a bit of bolder action. So yes, programs are important, initiatives are important, but what we do need is more strategic, more cultural, more general work experience lenses to be applied to our wellbeing programs to make sure we're tackling the things that people tell us really matter. And that final point there, quite often the things that drive wellbeing, the things that create good wellbeing outcomes, they're actually the things that create good cultures. They're the things that create good leaders. They're the things that keep your attrition levels healthy. They're the same things that keep your productivity levels healthy. So I think it's less about having a separate wellbeing program, but having that as a lens on your all-round people programs and making sure that we're not going too far into the wellbeing space and losing sight of the bigger picture. And if you want keen to hear more, a lot of the data that I've talked about today comes from our latest thought leadership report, Wellbeing That Works, and you can use the QR code there and download that on the website. Some of the other insights I presented came from the hybrid piece that we did at the back end of last year. Again, that's also available on the website. And please reach out with any questions, any thoughts, any challenges to the kind of the concept, I guess, that we're talking about. I'm really keen to continue the conversation and hear as many voices as possible.
Jack, thank you for this very insightful presentation, full of really important statistics and facts and our everyday life in the work these days. I mean, there's a staggering 37% of people are being close to burnout, which is a very high number. And I think with people, these days feeling a bit more comfortable talking about or asking for mental health support in those ways, I think, that conversation is not going away. I think we're going to have, we luckily now have a very supporting workplaces that, are open to those conversations happening and supporting their employees. So I think bringing that issue to the forefront of workplace is really important. I think one question for me is, from your research and all the key insights that you've shared, and there was lots of different, aspects of what could be the reason for that. What kind of key practical steps can HR practitioners take now to start, having that conversation in a workplace? Talk to their leadership about the changes that might need to take place. Is it the age? Is it the work mode? Hybrid versus office? Is it looking at as a whole? What's your take on this? Where should we start?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's the one we get asked the most is, okay, great. What do I do tomorrow? What can I do next week? And I think the starting point needs to be understanding your own workforce, understanding what your baseline is, what your starting point is, and what are your specific challenges. And quite often, again, without laboring the point, the things that people will tell you are creating that sense of low well-being, that sense of high burnout. They're actually the things that just get in the way of them doing their job. It's processes that are difficult. It's systems that are difficult. It's not having access to equipment or access to the information at my fingertips to do my job. And I think that is the key step change for people to think about, is that well-being is an outcome that comes from a lot of other things not necessarily being right. And I think the easy option that a lot of organizations take is to jump straight into that solution mode, straight into what we call initiative itis, where we just need a program. We need 5 well-being programs, and actually, are they pointed at the right thing? Are they pointed at the right people? Are they trying to solve the actual root cause of the issue? So I think it's about that. It's about trying to understand for you, for your business, for your sector, what are the key drivers, what are the key things that are getting in the way, and using data to inform those decisions.
I think I agree with you 100%. I think there is a research somewhere recently, can't cite where exactly from, but it definitely said that all the things that well-being programs that are being implemented, giving passes, the gym passes, or the things, like just kind of scratching the surface, and people are really looking for the real support and having a real conversations and employees understanding the issues that they're going through. And I think, coming from the pandemic, I'm a mum of 6, of 6-year-olds,
Wow.
so 6-year-olds, not 6 children, a 6-year-old, very high energy girl, and kind of doing work and doing parenting and doing all those things. It's hard, it's tough, and I think the fact that we can talk about it and bring that to the workplace is really important.
No, definitely, you're absolutely spot on. I think the risk in going down the programs and the initiative route is that it can create that sense amongst employees that you're paying lip service to it. So yes, you're talking the game around wellbeing, you're putting on a steps challenge, and you're giving me access to free gyms, yet actually you're making half the business redundant, or you're introducing new ways of working that are really detrimental to people, or you're not involving me in the change that's happening. So it risks creating that that sense of that you're being disingenuous, essentially. So it's a real fine line.
Great. Well, I think the last thing that you said is just let's involve the people in the decision making of what's actually happening, how to find a solution to these issues and to these challenges. Well, thank you so much again. It was a pleasure having you over and for sharing your insights. So it's bye from us now, and we're gonna start with our next speaker on the hour. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Marta. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.